Hello everybody. Today we'll be presenting on IMAPS and DNS, covering the configuration and security hardening techniques. This presentation covers two main topics, IMAPS and DNS, and we're going to start with IMAPS overview, IMAPS configuration for Linux, and then IMAPS hardening recommendations. Then we'll do a DNS overview, DNS configuration using IIS on Windows, DNS using IIS hardening recommendations, DNS configuration using bind for Linux, and DNS using bind hardening recommendations, and lastly, our sources. Now we'll talk about IMAPS, otherwise known as Internet Message Access Protocol Secure. So now we're going to do the IMAPS overview. So first, IMAPS ensures secure email retrieval through a SSL TLS encryption. So it ensures end-to-end encryption by using this and protects emails from interception. It operates in the application layer protocol of the OSI model, and it operates on port 993. Unlike non-secure IMAP, which runs on port 143, IMAPS ensures all communication is encrypted by default. Next, it offers synchronization and enhances security over POP3. So, for example, email will stay on the server on IMAPS, whereas emails are downloaded and deleted using POP3. Typically, they are used in conjunction, though. IMAPS is preferred in the modern email usage age because it keeps emails synchronized across multiple devices, so emails on your phone can be accessed from your computer and vice versa. Lastly, would be like who uses IMAPS. Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, and other major email providers support IMAPS for secure email retrieval. Business and organizations and personal users rely on it to access their emails securely across different devices. IMAPS is very important in protecting your sensitive data from cyber threats. It enhances your email accessibility, and it is essential for modern day email clients when dealing with possibly sensitive data. So when configuring IMAPS, in this particular instance using Dovecot on Linux, first we are going to use the command sudo apt install dovecot dash imapd space dovecot dash pop3d. This will install Dovecot. Next, we want to enable IMAPS. You can do this by doing a protocols equals IMAP. You want to generate a self-signing SSL TLS certificate and make sure that that is linked. And then you can use the command sudo systemctl restart to restart Dovecot and verify that it is up, secure, and running. So some IMAPS hardening recommendations using Dovecot first include ensuring a strong encryption. So I would ensure that you're using TLS 1.2 and disable any outdated or older versions. This is because they're just not as secure as the newest one. There's a reason it's the newest, it's the best. Next, I would disable plaintext authentication. To do this, you have to open your Dovecot configuration files and find a line that says disable underscore plaintext underscore auth. And you want to set this value to yes. And lastly, we only want to accept trusted IP addresses. By doing this, we ensure that we are significantly reducing the attack surface and enhancing our security. Next, we're going to talk about DNS, or Domain Name System. So a little overview about DNS. DNS converts a domain or host name such as www.google.com to a IP address for your computer to read, such as the one provided above. It allows users to access websites without remembering the numerical IP address, because nobody's going to remember that, but something like google.com is relatively easy to remember. It operates on UDP and TCP ports 53, and there are two different types of servers for DNS. There's an authoritative DNS server, and there's a recursive DNS server. The difference in these servers would be that a authoritative DNS server stores domain-specific records, whereas a recursive DNS server resolves queries by fetching records from authoritative outside sources. So next we're going to be setting up our configuring DNS using IIS on Windows. So I apologize for this slide being a little wordy. But first we're going to go to our Windows desktop, open the Start menu, and select the Server Manager title. On the menu, go to Manage and select Add Roles and Features. On this page, select the role base or feature based on the options and select Next. On the Select Server Roles page, select the DNS Server checkbox and then select the Next button. On the Confirm Installation Sections page, review the selected roles and features, then select the Install button to begin the installation. Once the installation is complete, select Close, and the installation does not require a reboot. From the Windows desktop, you can then go to the Start menu, select Windows Administrative Tools, and go to DNS. Select or right-click your server and then select Properties. To limit the DNS server to use a specific IP address, select only the following IP address. Select the IP addresses you wish to use and then select OK. And all of this information was from Microsoft.com on installing and configuring DNS using IIS. So DNS using IIS hardening recommendations. First, I would disable recursive queries. Recursive queries allow a DNS server to resolve queries on behalf of the client by contacting other DNS servers. This is useful for client devices but can be exploited in DNS amplification attacks. So the attackers can abuse recursive queries to perform DNS reflection attacks and overwhelm the system. Next, I would restrict zone transfers. So a zone transfer copies all DNS records from one DNS server to another. While necessary for a second DNS server, unrestricted zone transfers expose sensitive data, and attackers can retrieve all those DNS records and map out an organization's internal network. Next, I would restrict access to the IP addresses. So by default, DNS servers respond to queries from any IP address, making them vulnerable to attacks. And restricting your network to only allow trusted networks and devices to query on your server is going to keep your server from being flooded by DNS or malicious queries. And lastly, I would enable dynamic updates or secure dynamic updates on your system. So dynamic DNS updates allow clients to update their own records automatically. This is useful in certain environments, but it has to be secured to prevent unauthorized changes being made. Next, we're going to talk about DNS configuration using bind on Linux. So first, you're going to want to use the following command to install bind. It's going to be sudo space apt space update space and space sudo space apt space install space bind9 space dash y. And what this will do is it ensures that we're using the most secure or the latest most secure version of bind, and it allows us to configure and manage DNS zones, making it a critical component of network infrastructure. Next, we're going to use the command sudo space systemctl space enable space bind9 to enable bind on our system. This command ensures that bind automatically starts on system boot, and without enabling it, the service would need to be manually started every reboot. And lastly, we want to use the command sudo space systemctl space start bind space bind9, and this will start bind on the DNS server immediately, just in case you didn't restart your server. But this will get you all set up and configured to start getting deeper into the subject. So some DNS using bind hardening recommendations include first disabling recursive queries. Much like earlier, you want to do this to prevent unauthorized users from using your DNS server to resolve external domains, and this will reduce the risk of DNS amplification attacks. To do this, you want to modify the bind configuration files and set recursion to no. You can restart bind and the changes will be applied immediately. Next, we want to restrict zone transfers. This prevents unauthorized access to DNS zone data, which attackers could use for reconnaissance, and limit zone transfers only to trusted secondary, or in some cases, third DNS servers. Next, I would ensure that you're using the latest bind version. So this ensures security patches and performance improvements have been applied and protects against known vulnerabilities. You can regularly update bind using the command sudo apt update space and space sudo apt upgrade space bind9 space dash y. And lastly, I would enable DNSSEC. What this does is it protects against DNS spoofing and catch poisoning by digitally signing your DNS data. This ensures your DNS integrity and authenticity. And lastly, the DNS SNC does stand for Domain Name System Security Expansions. So it's in addition to DNS things that are already there. Lastly, here are my sources. Thank you guys so much for listening.